I will be here to enforce them. In the event of a knockdown, you must...
Tonight, both fighters say they are primed. Off a very intense.
Hello boxers, this is Bluntest Diagram, and today I'm going to be going over Fight Night Champion, hands down the best boxing game currently in existence. Now, to be fair, it's not like it's competing against a whole lot of different games. The only other boxing game that exists, really right now, is Undisputed, and that game came out a little while ago, but it was so unfinished that the hit detection is very, very poor, and the movement feels very awkward and unnatural. This is basically like a mobile game, if anything, if you ask me. I'm actually glad that they don't follow the 2K model of basically releasing an unfinished game every year and then just telling everybody, don't worry, we're going to fix it in the next patch. And they keep saying that every patch until it's time for the next game to come out in the next year, then you gotta buy that one. It's not perfect, but it's by no means rushed or unfinished. That doesn't mean that Fight Night Champion is perfect or couldn't be improved. But for the last 15 years, this has been the smoothest gameplay, the most realistic experience, and the overall best way to, have a good time boxing with people. That's why the community has stayed active for all these years. Even though this game is great, I would say one of its biggest problems is actually within the leaderboards and how it's structured. You see, the game is really old and so there's no one to moderate the leaderboards. And therefore, the leaderboards are infested and plagued with all sorts of exploiters and hackers and just people who overall cheat the system one way or another. There's a lot of different ways. There's quit glitching. That's the most common one. That's when you quit out of matches, but instead of receiving a loss, you actually assign the loss to your opponent and you receive a win instead. There's also modding, which is whenever you adjust your boxer's overall stats, or even the sliders that affect the gameplay. I'm not 1,000,000% sure about that, but there is recorded footage out there proving the existence of mods. That's overall not what this video is about, though. I would say that sort of stuff only exists in about maybe 2 to 5% of the community. The only problem is that the highest concentration of all of the cheaters and hackers are all at the leaderboards. There's basically no one legitimate that I've ever come across. I play Fight Night Champion for about 3 fights every day, and I've never even seen most of these people on the leaderboards. So that begs the question, what makes somebody good at Fight Night Champion? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because I'm going to go ahead and break down into a criteria exactly what I think are the different skill levels of Fight Night Champion. And so if you're a beginner, this is hopefully going to really help you out and give you some things to look for and some metrics that you can take into consideration right now and instantly improve your game. For more advanced players, I hope that this is a very validating and appreciative rundown of all of the skills in the game that you guys exhibit. I'll be honest, I only consider maybe like 5 or 10, maybe even only 3% of players actually, advanced. There's tons of players that have maybe 1 or 2 skills, but I'm talking about the advanced players that have, 20 or 30 skills. 20 or 30 tools or pieces of equipment that they can use in the fight, just like a carpenter at the job site. So with that in mind, I'm going to be going over each of the different skill levels in this game, from absolute beginner to most advanced. And I'm going to be telling you what to look for at each skill level, or how that level of opponent will present themselves in the fight. I'm only going to be going over 4 skill levels. Now, obviously, they're on a spectrum, but overall, people fit into, one of these 4 categories, more or less. And those categories are beginner, novice, intermediate, and then advanced. So let's get into it.
The straight punches. Watch how Brian Sutherland just tries to throw anything that he can, flailing at his opponent.
Rainford won 24 of his 25 amateur bouts in Great Britain. Turned pro in a third-round knockout over Aaron Nance last November. He gets the right hand, and that stuns.
So let's say that you just got Fight Night champion. You've always heard that this was the best boxing game, but you've never played any of the Fight Nights, and so you're a beginner. Well, the first thing that you're going to notice is that the hitting's kind of awkward and unnatural. It's very counterintuitive. It feels like whenever you want to punch your opponent, none of your punches get through, but then whenever your opponent wants to hit you, his punches get right through the guard. Sometimes you try to punch back, and you get lucky and seem to hurt your opponent, and sometimes your opponent seems to just steamroll you and you have no idea what's happening. Now, that's just because you're not aware of a lot of the mechanics yet, and you're going to get better at that with time. There's a lot of great single-player modes that you can practice in. There's a story mode, a championship mode. You can even do training mini-games that are going to help you out, or you can just spar against the computer to get a feel for things. That being said, what are the most common mistakes or problems that I see for beginner players? Let's go over the ones that I see most commonly. Number 1, not managing stamina. Now, I can't stress this enough. Kind of what I was talking about earlier, there's a very common occurrence where new players will come forward at somebody and then throw a couple of punches, and then the other guy will throw a couple of punches back, and both people will be connecting against each other, but then all of a sudden one of them will get dropped, and the beginner player's wondering how come they lose all of these encounters. It always seems like they get the worst of each exchange. Well, I'll tell you the most common reason, and it's that they don't have good stamina management. They let their stamina get too low, and then whenever they do so, the overall boxer effectiveness dramatically lowers. One of the hallmarks of somebody who's a beginner or just not very good at the game is somebody who doesn't understand how to manage their stamina very well, and they'll let this bar get too low. Once this bar gets too low, basically any hit will dramatically hurt you or even knock you down. And even just a couple of rounds of spending too much stamina might make your boxer completely ineffective. The quicker you can get used to keeping your eye on this bar and making sure that it never gets below half, and that once it gets below half that you need to let it recharge all the way back up to maximum, you're going to be in a lot better of shape. You can actually beat a lot of players, even as a beginner, by simply outlasting them and letting them beat themselves by letting them drain too much stamina on their own. Be sure to keep your eye on this meter and never let it get below half, and always let it recharge as best as possible. That way you give yourself a competitive chance within the fight. The next mistake that I see a lot of beginner players do is that they punch back whenever they get hit. So beginner players have a really hard time connecting shots. And keep in mind that a lot of the opponents that they face might be going backwards the entire time and might present very few opportunities. And so when they finally do open up and throw a couple of punches, the beginner's thinking, great, finally the other person's opening up, he's hitting me, I can hit him a little bit. Finally, because they're throwing punches, I can throw punches at them. You don't want to do that. Whenever someone's throwing punches, you always want to have a defense mindset and move away from punches. Let your opponent miss. Sometimes they'll whiff so bad that you'll actually have wide open opportunities to be able to counter, even if you're not very good at the game. And at the very least, you might get them to spend more stamina than they want, and then you'll have an easier fight as things go on. The main reason why you don't want to punch back though whenever you get hit is that getting hit tends to lower your accuracy for a couple of seconds. Any punches that you throw right back right after getting hit tend to not be very accurate, and they also have a tendency to glance off of your opponent. So they're not going to be very effective anyways. That's why it's better to always reset. The last thing that I see beginners do all the time is that they spam the same punch by accident. So A lot of players have a favorite punch, and they'll spam that punch, and it's very, very annoying. It is annoying, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about beginners that are spamming the same punch by accident. That's whenever they get too excited and so they start mashing the controller literally, and they'll get a lot of these disjointed animations and so forth because none of these punches are timed. In order to truly be effective at Fight Night, you actually have to time and measure your punches, which is more of an advanced skill that we'll talk about later on. But whenever you throw 3, 4, even 5 of the same punch on the exact same side, you're basically just begging for your opponent to counter you in some sort of regard. Even if they don't know how to counter you, you're going to teach them throughout the course of the fight just by giving them basically like a crash test dummy to work on. I think normally what's happening whenever you see a player do this is that, they're either overstimulated or they're frustrated with the game and therefore they're not thinking at all, they're just mashing. You never want to exhibit this kind of non-thinking, NPC Roomba sort of behavior. You always want to behave with intelligence. And whenever you're in trouble, the answer is not to just start pressing buttons, but always to move around and use good defense and look for opportunities. Now, I'm not really sure what the percentage of beginners in this game is. I think it's actually pretty sizable. It might be anywhere between 10 to maybe even 20%. It's tough to say because, first of all, the game power ranks you, meaning that whenever you search for a match, it looks for people within your own level and range to match up with you first. On top of that, beginners tend to have a very high DNF. That stands for did not finish. Now, obviously, not all beginners are quitters, but what I'm trying to say is that people that have a high DNF or did not finish typically exhibit a lot of beginner-like qualities. Which brings me to my next point. If you are a beginner, don't quit out of fights. Stick around and try to copy the tactics that you see being used against you. The best way for you to actually learn is to see what works for other people and then see if you could emulate any of that or maybe even sneak in your own counterattacks because you're basically already in experimental mode since you're losing anyway. So seize the opportunity to kind of try to learn as much as you can. The other main thing is that you want to turn both of these meters on. You want to go into options and you want to set to where you can see your health and your stamina meter. And then you want to watch those closely like I talked about and make sure that they never dip too low in any category. Always reset yourself and make sure that you recharge any of those things before you even think about attacking. The last thing is that since you're a beginner, you're not going to have a very good attack yet. And so instead of attacking in a traditional sense, you're going to use kind of what are these blitzes instead. Whenever you see that your opponent has thrown a couple of punches, right after they throw a little combination and your stamina is still fresh, you want to get in there and throw a couple of punches back in combination. Now I know that seems kind of the opposite of what I said earlier, but I was saying earlier if you get hit, you don't want to throw back. But if your opponent misses like a 3 or 4 punch combination, then you want to get in there and blitz them instead. You want to get in there, throw a couple of punches, maybe a couple will get through, and then you reset back out and keep boxing. 2 more things. The first is that you have to realize that weight matters even in the same playable weight class online. Meaning that if you pick somebody like Roy Jones Jr. against, Mike Tyson or George Foreman, your punches are going to be a lot lighter and less effective against somebody like that. You're going to be quicker moving around, but it's going to be a major trade-off, and so you don't want to trade with somebody a lot bigger than you. And it even counts towards middleweight too. If you're somebody like, let's say, Ricky Hatton against somebody like Jake LaMotta or somebody like Ricardo Alvarez, you're going to have a really, really tough time because weight advantages in this game are a real thing. I don't think 7 or 8 pounds matter, but definitely 20 pounds do. Only pick somebody smaller if you're just having fun and if you're going to try to move around as best as possible and have more of a defensive mindset. And then the last thing real quick is don't play OWC. OWC has a lot of hackers and modders and just people that quit out and cheat, and so not only are you going to have a frustrating experience, but you're also going to see a lot of bad habits being portrayed, and it's going to give you the wrong impression of the game. People are going to do and get away with a lot of nonsense in that mode, and they're going to give you a lot of BS reasons that it's the sliders of this or that, or they adjusted this punch to 20 or whatever, but there's really no way of knowing if people aren't cheating in that mode. And I'm being serious when I say that it's rampant in OWC. I think it's as high as like 20%. Either way, it's not nearly as bad in head-to-head, and at least in head-to-head, you can also train against, certain boxers so you can know what to expect and at least even be able to gauge for yourself what seems natural. In OWC, unless you get someone to really cooperate with you, you're not going to be able to perfectly recreate their boxer so you can spar against it, or you can measure, what things should cost as far as stamina goes and how fast they should be, just to make sure that they're not cheating. Everyone's going to say, oh, you're just complaining about losing. But no, there are real cheaters out there. There's actual videos where people basically admit to it and show you their stats and so forth. My whole point is, you just don't even have to mess with it as much in head-to-head. I wouldn't worry about it too much, but part of why I even made this video is that I wanted to show that if you're hacking this game and you're still losing fights and you don't have very many skills, you're even below beginner in my mind. And there's a lot of players that are hacking and that think they're good, even though the only reason why they even stand a chance in some fights is because they have increased power or stamina or some sort of BS. And so this list is going to hopefully dispel a lot of that nonsense too, that if you're only seeing one or two tricks out of these hackers, the only reason why they're even able to remain somewhat competitive is because they have, boosts on and so forth. But that's not really something that happens very, very often, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But again, I would not consider somebody advanced if they only have 2 or 3 skills. I don't care how well they do those skills. Now in OWC, I feel like the game lets you get away with a lot more as far as editing and hacking goes, but just in head-to-head, it's not something that has as much of an impact. You won't see it as commonly. Next level, Novice. Now, this is just barely above beginner. This is when you've had the game for a little bit, and you've been through a couple of the modes, and you've had your first breakthrough discovery. It's like fire to you. And that discovery is counters. You found out randomly that if you move your head and then you connect with some of these counters by luck sometimes, that it has these thunderous effects that can drop opponents randomly and get stuns a lot easier. It's a lot easier and simpler than throwing hundreds of punches in combination per round and then having no effect. At least now it actually looks kind of cool and like you're literally boxing. You feel like Muhammad Ali or Conor McGregor out there. The other thing that you might have discovered at this level so far is finally the concept of pump blocking. You've discovered from seeing other people do it that if you keep tapping the block button, it tends to make your block somewhat stronger and easier to defend against punches. The sooner that you can discover this, the better overall that you're going to be, although there are still lots of novices that don't have this skill. The other main thing that I see from novices is that they always have a favorite punch. I don't consider you even a novice if you don't at least have one good punch that you can use as your go-to.
It's not going to impress anyone.
This is an embarrassment.
The fans want to see a fight. They want to see heart, determination, and skill, not whatever this is.
I don't know what's going on. I do not know what's going on. I'm tired of these fighters being like fucking clowns all the time.
I'm at a loss for words here, Teddy.
You see this right here, Joe? This is why nobody wants to play Fight Night anymore. Because of fuckers like this guy throwing his straight right hand.
Now the folks ringside, the judges obviously are trying their best to see what they can do. Of course, they're going to give the man with the straight spams a win here because the other guy is just doing nothing.
That's all he's going to do. The whole fight, he's going to throw that straight right hand. Look at the other guy. The other fighter ain't doing anything. You know why he's not doing anything, Joe? Because he's tired of the spam.
Yes,
because that's all you do when you play. That's why the people disrespect the art of this great sport. Look at him just dodging around. See? Look, there he is. He's dodging around. Look what the other guy's going. Oh, he's got a straight right hand again, Joe.
These fighters,
I'm sick of it.
They knew what they were getting into. I don't understand. They were prepared for the fight.
They're boring.
Now, when you're a beginner, you don't know any of the punches, and so all of them feel difficult and hard to use. But when you get to the novice level, you finally found one that you like to use, and that seems to work pretty well for you. Now, hopefully, if you're listening to this, I'm praying that it's the jab, but more than likely than not, it's probably the straight. Hey, I get it. Early on, the straight's the only punch that actually seems to land, and then it's the only punch that seems to have any actual stopping power. Other punches, when they connect, especially the jab sometimes, it doesn't seem like it does anything to your opponent. Whenever you connect with a jab, then they just hit you with the hook to the face, and so you take the worst of it. And so maybe you've discovered by this point that the straight's the only punch that actually disrupts your opponent's animations and gets you to be able to control range and dictate what's happening in the fight. Anyways, I get it. If your opponent's reaching in with hooks, then a straight to the face is a great option. But making the hook your favorite punch can develop a lot of good habits as well. Since the hook is only effective at close ranges, you have to train yourself to be able to move your head, that way you can look for counters to be able to land that hook. That's a good habit to develop early. It also teaches you to close distance, and if you close distance enough, you might discover by accident that sometimes if you're holding block, and you block your opponent's punches as you're coming forward, it tends to smother them and make their punches less effective, and then you can land your hooks. By doing this, you're kind of setting yourself up to learning how to fight on the inside, and that's another good habit to be able to develop and build later on also. Uppercuts are another good favorite punch to have. The right uppercut to the body was actually my favorite punch for a really long time. Having your favorite punch be the body uppercut teaches and trains you to go to the body early. Going to the body and connecting damages your opponent's stamina and makes them a lot easier to box as the rounds go on. Having your favorite punch be the uppercut to the head normally teaches you to land uppercuts as your opponent either comes in or whenever they just have their guard up stationary and they're planted. So this teaches you good timing, which is another good habit to have also. If your favorite punch is the jab, which I think that it should be for each person, then that teaches you how to whiff punish. Whiff punishing is in other fighting games too. It's whenever an opponent misses so bad that they're wide open for an easy attack. And the jab is the best whiff punisher in this game. It may not seem like a lot, but a few well-timed jabs can really do a lot of good damage, especially if your opponent is whiffing a lot and you're punishing them. The other thing about using the jab is that it also teaches you to use moves that are safe on approach. That means that you can launch the jab from a safe distance from a certain range and be able to not really risk too much. And sometimes landing that first jab makes any sort of subsequent punches that much easier to land, that hitting the opponent with the jab kind of opens them up and makes it easier to hit them with even more punches for the next few seconds. If you're really good, you can also sneak the jab in the middle of your opponent's combos and disrupt them. It'll make your opponent start to have these miss animations, and it actually tires them out even faster. I'm going to say that a good chunk, or even most players, are probably novices. I'm going to say anywhere between 30 to maybe even 60%. The best advice that I could give a novice is to work on that jab and especially whiff punishing. One of the biggest mistakes that I see them constantly do is telegraphing their intention. That can look like a couple of different things. The most obvious one is windmilling. That's when you stand in the center of the ring and you just use head movement repeatedly, and you're basically just trying to look for counters. The reason why you don't want to do that is that, number one, it advertises exactly what you're trying to do to your opponent, and then your opponent can look for easy ways to counter you. The other thing is that even if your opponent doesn't know what they're doing, it drains a lot of stamina. Definitely watch my Stamina Lab video, where I go a lot more into detail about windmilling and sidestep spamming, because those are big no-nos for any level of experience or so-called skill. I see a lot of quote-unquote skilled players lose fights simply because they spam too much head movement and sidestepping, so you don't want to fall into that category. You also don't want to throw a lot of triple jabs. I don't know why it is, but you always see people in videos or even people online thinking that I guess throwing 3 jabs in a row looks cool, even though I've never seen it done in real life. In my 38 years of life, I have never seen someone consistently run out there and jab, 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 jab. I think these people are taking my love and advice towards the jab too far. Whenever you throw that many jabs in a row, you're making it very, very easy for your opponent to be able to lean and counter you, even by accident. So you might think that it looks cool, but these are mistakes that are going to cause you to throw away fights. And the last thing is that you don't want to throw combinations that are longer than 2 punches once your stamina reaches below a certain point. I think that when this fight begins and you have 100% stamina, then it's okay to throw 4 or even 6 punch combinations, but keep in mind, that's going to cause your stamina to decrease. Once your stamina gets to, 60% or below, if you throw combinations like that, if your opponent catches you in the middle of that, you might finish the animation by accident, and during each one of those expenditures of stamina, you're going to be so open to just getting crushed by any sort of hit. And sometimes that's exactly what's going to happen to you. And so whenever your stamina is 60% or below, then it's time to cut down those combinations from, 3-4 punches, even more, down to just 2 punches, 1 punch at a time or whatever. That way you're going to, cut down on situations where you're going to be open.
Once again, he's got it. No surprise, he actually got up at 7. Oh, he's got him again. Pretty hard, he once again sprawled on the canvas. First knockdown. Beautiful right hand. Look at the pain on Hardy's face. I know how hard he has to hit.
So now we're going to go ahead and talk about intermediate. And once again, intermediate is a very, very broad range. On the lower end of the spectrum, you're going to see cheesers. Now, a cheeser is somebody that has a lot of technical skill, but then they also make a lot of errors. And so their errors kind of defeat them all on their own, or negate any skills that they do have. A specialist is the exact opposite. A specialist is a very, very person high on the intermediate list. They're not quite advanced, but they're very, very high. They're real close to becoming advanced. They have the opposite situation as a cheeser. Yes, maybe the specialist doesn't have every skill in the book, but they don't make very many mistakes, and because of that, they can be very, very tough and formidable to go against, especially if you're the style that isn't very well suited for countering whatever the specialist is the specialist at. So in order to even qualify for being intermediate in my book, you have to be able to pump block. At this level, it's non-negotiable. Yes, there's like one other person that has a legitimate case for disagreeing with me about this because they have even a more advanced block. They have like a reflex block or like a soft block, which is where they only hold the block button so much to be able to maximize whenever they want to fully put on the pressure, and it gives them more parries. I'm not here to advertise anything like that, but in order to at least be intermediate, you have to be able to pump block, because if you don't pump block, your block will actually weaken the longer that you hold it. If you walk around the ring holding block for 12 seconds or so, by the time that your opponent actually gets over to you and starts throwing combinations, they're almost guaranteed to get through. That's why you need to reset your block by constantly tapping it, and this maintains the block's complete strength, not allowing punches to get through. This is by far the easiest thing that you can do at the intermediate level. The other thing is that now you have to have a preferred range. Earlier at the novice level, you have a favorite punch, but now you're going to have a favorite range to operate out of. There's only 3 ranges in this game. There's outside, there's inside, and then there's, I would say, either neutral or flat-footed or in the pocket, however you want to say it. Novices are looking for counters, and so they're basically spamming certain defensive maneuvers or certain attacks in order to get the counters that they want. But at the intermediate level, you start to see a whole system of traps and baits and just methods and strategies in order to eventually wear somebody down. They're not just looking for one random occurrence. They have a whole network and a whole system of things that they're looking for to eventually implement their strategy. Now, it's very basic. The person who's fighting on the outside wants to whiff punish. They want to bait their opponent into coming in, and then they're going to go ahead and land straight punches normally, headshots or power shots if available, and they are going to cause their opponent to miss, reset, and just keep chipping away at that health. Now, believe it or not, the inside fighter's kind of doing the same thing, but on the inside. They're looking for the opponent to miss a couple of punches, and then they want to close distance and smother them and get inside, and what they're hoping happens is that the other opponent starts to get too excited and starts throwing punches. And whenever he throws punches from up too close, they're not going to have any sort of appropriate impact. They're not going to do any damage, and therefore the person smothering can block those, and then he can time real good effective shots, body hooks, body uppercuts, maybe even just, jab straights, etc. But he's going to get the better of those exchanges, and over time when this adds up, he'll be able to wear his opponent down, he's going to soften them and take away their stamina, and then he's just going to eventually steamroll them, however long that it takes. And then the person fighting out of the pocket, they have a lot of confidence looking for big power shots or big counters that they're going to catch their opponent with, normally they're going to bait their opponent into opening up in some sort of regard, and that's when that person's ranking to be in this person's specialty, and they're going to counter them with big shots. Now, here's the thing. If you're a great inside fighter or a great outside fighter, regardless of what style you have, your ultimate goal should be to eventually freeze the other person up to where they quit moving, and that way you can land, the big shots from inside the pocket. If you don't have the ability to actually fight in the pocket and be able to look for big counters, then in my opinion, you're kind of more of you're more of a specialist. You're lacking technical aspects in your game that could actually help you out and speed things up for you. If you're dominating somebody on the inside or outside, you can normally get them to eventually kind of give up and plant their feet, and then once you do that, then you really have them opened up for all kinds of different attacks. Basically, it means that you know exactly where to find them, but then you can go ahead and choose your attack and kind of attack them by surprise at any moment, and then back out and reset, and you have every advantage in the book. Or as the inside fighter, you're a lot more used to making the pocket smaller than people are used to, and therefore you can be effective from a lot closer ranges than people can account for, and you can surprise people in that regard. So that's the other thing. Obviously, fighters that are taller are better at fighting on the outside. Shorter fighters have an easier time countering and creating a really, really good pocket from up close. They can sneak in a nasty left hook to the body or to the chin and surprise you at any given moment, and therefore they're more effective at the smothering range. Now, once again, you can't consider yourself intermediate if you're not at least good at one of the ranges.
Short pants, then their short pants, yeah. Your pants are like my Cheeba, baby, they're Smokin.
And inversely, if you're losing to what you consider quote-unquote spam, it's not because that person is spamming, it's because you're spamming the same range over and over again, and because you keep giving the person the exact same look, they don't have to make any adjustments. They can keep using the same punch or the same maneuver since you keep occupying the same range, and you keep getting hit with the same stuff then. If you're getting hit with the uppercut repeatedly, you need to ask yourself, am I crowding my opponent too much? If you're getting hit with the power straight too often, you need to ask yourself, am I hanging out at the wrong range? Do I need to step out, or do I need to step in after he misses a couple of punches and start smothering him? At this level, you're finally going to start to see baits and traps. A trap is whenever you get your opponent in a situation that you want them in, and then you get them to do a behavior that you want, and then you're able to capitalize with the counter that you have prepared. There's traps for every imaginable scenario in this game. There is a tool and a thing to do in each situation, and so I'm going to go over as many as possible in the most logical order that I can. We're going to go through the different ranges and then talk about either the traps or the techniques that you need to use depending on what's happening. And so the first, we're going to start with the outside, and then one of the main basic things you're going to learn is circling away from the ropes whenever your back's against the ropes. If you find yourself trapped against the ropes, opponents can have a really, really easy time throwing together combinations against you, so you always want to go ahead and make sure that your back's not against those ropes, it's towards the center of the ring, so you're going to want to circle out and maintain distance. The next skill that you're going to have is jabs against a moving opponent. The jab straight is a really important combination to the head against the opponents that aren't really doing a whole lot. This is one of the easiest combinations in the game to land against an opponent who's just standing using neutral block. And you also want to get used to jab strings. Jab strings are whenever you land a good jab and you see that it damages your opponent and gets through. This tells you that you have a high likelihood of a second or even a third or fourth punch getting through. If your opponent is backing up a whole lot, then the jab straight to the face works great. If they are walking into you, or you're not really worried about them stepping out, then the jab, either right hook to the body or right uppercut to the body, works great for jamming them and landing two good connections as they come forward into you. It also jams any punch animations that they might be going for. There's also the check hook, Right before I recorded this, I actually had a really, really good fight against Oddfellow. He's the moderator from Reddit for the Fight Night community. Anyways, he had an excellent check hook. A check hook is a really, really good tool whenever an opponent is upright and stationary. They're not really using a ton of head movement, and they have their block up, and so you know that maybe, one punch isn't going to get through, but the hook has a higher likelihood of landing if you can go ahead and lunge into it and get that correct distance. And then it's a very, very good scoring punch that can be really tricky to counter because you're not sure when the person's going to lunge in. When you can create uncertainty in your opponent, then you can get them to miss a lot because they're not sure when you're going to come in or not. And so they start whiffing punches, misjudging when you're going to enter in and attack them. That's exactly what happened in our fight. I wasn't sure when he was going to come in with his hooks, and so I misjudged a lot of the timing for my punches and missed a whole lot. We had a great fight, but both of us were so good that for the most part we weren't really able to hurt each other until the very last round when we went for broke basically. But other skills you might see are the intercepting straight. That's whenever someone's whiffing a lot of punches and you just throw a straight right down the middle and it just jams their animations and stops them. Or the scoring straight. That's whenever someone's backing up a whole lot, and so you kind of time them where maybe you get them against the ropes, or you know that they're going to come forward and meet you in the middle, and so you just score a nice regular naked straight. It could be behind the jab, I suppose, but being able to time a scoring straight is very, very important in this game. Kind of in that same category is the power straight. Whenever someone is coming in completely square with their head just, right in the middle, the power straight is a great technique to damage them bad and just, completely halt their movement. But it's also a really, really important maneuver whenever someone is backing up constantly. You deal with somebody who's running and just circling the ring, you're eventually going to need them to respect you by either fighting back or using head movement. If they're only backing up and circling around the ring, you want to time them to whenever they're at one of the corners and you have them trapped. You want to be an expert in timing the power straight to be able to land it whenever they have nowhere else to move, and so you can threaten them with the powerful punch whenever you have them cornered. Whenever you do that, then you can actually get them to force them to use head movement, which will eventually open up other things or at least tire them out and let them not, conserve as much stamina just by dancing around the ring. Believe it or not, there's actually a lot of really, really good body attacks you can use on the outside too. Here's some of my favorites. Probably the number one is the power body straight. This is like a spear to the ribs or spear to the body from really, really good range that you can use for all kinds of reasons. Whenever somebody is too stationary, I like to use this. Whenever I can tell somebody doesn't really want to engage unless I get close, I always start out with one of these attacks because they're very, very hard to judge whenever it's going to, come in, so you can surprise somebody with it and get them a good stab right to the midsection. This is a great punch because normally it has a lot of stopping power simply because it's a power shot. Power shots are also less likely to be interrupted by your opponent's punches, meaning that the move has a little bit of armor. You can actually get hit in the middle of throwing this punch and it won't interrupt your animation. You'll still land most of the time. And then it's always just good habits to go to the body because it slows your opponent down as the fight goes on. You can watch my video about body attack and how to really, really make sure that you get the most out of body attack because I'll completely break down how you want to drain your opponent's stamina the most efficiently, and so that's definitely one of my videos that you should check out that I made earlier. Anyways, the power straight to the body is both just a great naked punch that you can throw, meaning that there doesn't have to be any setup. Your opponent could just be, sitting there too passively, or it's a great whiff punish. The same with the right power uppercut to the body. Not only is this a great counter and a great whiff punisher, sometimes if your opponent backs up and they're, just super passive, you can get them to corner against the ropes, and then you can time really, really good power hooks. I normally do two, right and then left, or left and then right, depending on the direction that I'm going. And this can be a great move to use at range. And the opponent has two choices. Either they can risk eating them, or they can try to fight back and try to hit you upon entry, but you can trick them into thinking that you're about to enter, but then don't enter, kind of like that my opponent did that I was just talking about, and then you can open them up for all sorts of attacks. So yes, the power straight to the body and even the power uppercut to the body are actually good moves to do from the outside range, believe it or not, even though they're body attacks. You definitely want to experience with these while you're moving around, and if you have these in your arsenal, then you are a great outside fighter with a lot of versatility. Beyond the simple, jab straight reset or, jab hook reset, you have a lot more options once you can incorporate these body attacks into it as well. So if you're an inside specialist, then you want to jam punches and close in. In order to close in, what you're going to want to do is you have two major options. The first thing that you can do is you can wait for your opponent to miss, then you can kind of close the distance whenever they've already missed a couple of punches, and so their stamina is a little bit compromised, and you can use that as an opportunity to close in when they can't really throw effective punches anyway. If they're not really throwing a lot of punches, then you can do my favorite technique, the jab to the face, straight to the body. This is a great combination for both scoring and for jamming your opponent's possible combinations or outside attack. Keep in mind that the inside fighter is normally shorter, and so once they get kind of within their jab range, they're going to have a little bit easier of a time getting their jab off first before their opponent does, and then closing that distance. And shorter fighters have an easier time using head movement up close to make their opponents miss, and so they can deliver punishing counters to the body or to the face. Now keep in mind that they might be able to generate a lot of power up close when their opponent can't. And so all they have to do is a little bit of head movement at the correct time, and then bam, power left hook to the body can just be devastating. One of those, and it may not have an immediate impact, but then the moment they do their next punch, all of a sudden they see that stamina just drop and then stay low for the couple of seconds, and then they're really hurt. And that's when you jump all over them. You really want to get used to cornering somebody whenever you're an inside fighter, and the sooner that you embrace the idea of cornering people, you're going to have a much easier time. When you get somebody cornered and they try to either circle out or use head movement, repeated hooks to the body are great. I love doing right, left, right as somebody's trying to circle out, and then they have to eat all of those body hooks. If they try to punch back whenever they're against the ropes, that's whenever you can implement that power straight to the body like I was talking about earlier, and you can just spear them and stab them whenever they're against the ropes and really have them kind of like a trapped animal. If your opponent repeatedly tries to meet you in the middle, or whenever they're cornered against the ropes, they try to walk forward and then throw punches to get you to back off, what you can do is you can meet them whenever they begin to step forward with a couple of great body uppercuts. They don't have to be power shots, but normally a little 3-punch body uppercut combo, because you're smaller, your punches will get there first, and they will jam whatever combination your opponent was hoping to throw. Normally, they try to throw a bunch of uppercuts to get you to back up, but yours will land first, and they will drain the shit out of your opponent's stamina and really, just be like stabbing holes in the bottom of their bucket. That water is going to start to leak out very quickly. If your opponent is really trapped in stationary, that's where you want to go ahead and open up with the shoe shine. That's whenever you do either a bunch of body hooks or a bunch of body uppercuts, and whenever a few of them, land in succession pretty reliably, then all of a sudden you want to send the last punch to be a power shot to the face. Sugar Ray Leonard was an expert about doing this in real life. He has some beautiful shoe shines that he was able to land throughout his career. They work in this game too. Whenever you're able to soften up anybody with a couple of good shots to the body, it always weakens their ability to guard the face for a little bit, and then you're able to throw a couple of great hooks or whatever you want to land in the face right afterwards. Right before I fought that guy that I was just telling you about, Oddfellow, the Fight Night Champion Reddit moderator, I went against another Sugar Ray Leonard, and I was really able to showcase putting together combinations against a stationary target like this. Whenever you break that guard, it's like the floodgates are open. You can just get a lot of stuff to go through, especially against the Philly shell. So you want to get used to cornering people and then being able to capitalize whenever they're trapped. The last body attack that I use every now and then, especially when you're a lot shorter, is the 1-2-1-2 to the body against a taller opponent. If your opponent is throwing a lot of aggressive straight punches against you because you're short, but they're not very accurate, you can time him and hit him with a 1-2-1-2 to the body, and if he keeps throwing back in spite of being hit, this can drain him of stamina very quickly, because stamina attacks are way more effective if they're interrupting your opponent's moves, or hitting them mid-combination. Body punches aren't quite as effective naked, meaning that if I just walk over to somebody and hit them while they're blocking, yeah, they do damage, but not as much as if I hit them when they're in the middle of throwing their combinations. Oh yeah, and one more, I love using this move. So if your opponent is aggressively throwing punches to keep you outside, and whenever you get close, they tend to attack to keep you away, you can anticipate one of those attacks, get him to lunge, lean or move away from the punch, and then you can counter by slipping underneath of it and doing a counter right hook to the body. It slips underneath a lot of punches, even by default, meaning that the natural animation of the person ducking down causes them to slip underneath certain punches and then land a free counter. You don't have to do this out of a weave. All you have to do is, back in and out, or maybe lean underneath of a punch slightly if you can anticipate it, and this is a counter that I can land very reliably in a lot of fights. Okay, sorry. Now moving on to fighting inside of the pocket. So the most common skills you're going to see from people fighting out of the pocket, for better or worse, are going to be the sidestep straight, sidestep uppercut, or maybe the backstep straight. Now, to be fair, whenever your opponent is spamming the exact same punch over and over and over again, these are the perfect counters against that, especially if you know what side it's coming from. You can step to that side and then land the appropriate counter. So I'm not going to hate on somebody for doing what they're supposed to be doing. But the reason why I would be careful with these moves is because some people overly rely on them, and then if you do too many sidesteps or dashes, it'll eventually tire you out. Sidestepping can actually burn more stamina than even punching does. So people that rely on just these couple of moves have a tendency to gas themselves out, and then cost themselves fights. You can't be advanced simply spamming a bunch of sidestep moves, or backstep straights. That being said, getting your opponent to plant their feet or misjudge distance opens them up for every move in the book. We're talking about power hooks to the face, power uppercuts as somebody comes in, even like a leaning, pull counter like the Floyd Mayweather pull counter straight, counter 1-2s, counter hooks to the body, counter uppercuts to the body. The better you are at fighting inside of the pocket means that the range of the pocket grows for you. That could mean that you still have a really good pocket up close and tight. From there, you're knowledgeable about the left hook to the body or the uppercut to the body. Maybe you have the confidence to be able to land a short right-hand counter out of some head movement, just like Joe Louis used to do. He had a really good, short, straight right punch. It only traveled a couple of inches, but it was enough to knock you out if it caught you by surprise. If you're great, your pocket also has more range further outside. Someone might completely miss a punch and then their face is wide open for a huge counter. Whenever you hit somebody with a counter power shot to the face, specifically like a counter power hook, that shows supreme confidence and supreme timing and understanding of the game. At this level, you want to start getting comfortable throwing power shots. Now keep in mind, whenever you plant your feet, your punches do way more damage and have better accuracy. That's why Vlad the Violent's highlights are so devastating. And that's also what I mean by having supreme confidence, because you're sacrificing movement by remaining stationary to get that extra power and accuracy, because you know whenever you have the finish. Now, there's a lot of intermediate players that don't throw any power shots, but in order to actually become advanced, you need to have the confidence to throw them. If you're okay with just being intermediate, then that's fine. But great fighters will start to gain confidence against you, and they won't respect you. They'll start to walk right in and put together combinations if they know that you're not going to throw anything super dangerous back. Even if your style is technically flawless without using any sort of power shots, you'd be having a much easier time if you put power shots at the end of certain combinations, or had more ability to hit a shelled up blocking target, because now you have something that can pierce their block a lot easier. If you never throw power shots, you're kind of more at the mercy of looking for your opponent to miss so you can counter, because power shots and counters are the only punches that are almost guaranteed a high likelihood of landing. Not throwing power shots forces you to be a lot more passive. So again, I think it's possible to be intermediate if you don't throw any power shots, but definitely not advanced. In order to become advanced, you have to be throwing at least 8% or so power shots. The more the better. The more percentage of power shots you throw relative to your total number of punches, especially if you're landing at a good connect, percentage of 50% or above, just shows great confidence and great control of the fight. So start developing the habit of it. And if you're watching this and you consider yourself elite, but you never throw any sort of power shots, you're not elite or advanced. Which brings me to the common problems that I see at the intermediate stage. So like I was talking about earlier, if you're consistently losing to spam, then it's probably you who's spamming the same range. You need to experiment with either moving outside, or closing in, or being able to fight out of the pocket to give your opponent more looks. If you're getting hit repeatedly with the same punch over and over again, give them a different range. If your opponent just beats you at that range, well, at least you made them do something different and now you're not being spammed. Then they are just better than you. But if you're getting hit with uppercut and uppercut and uppercut, just back up. If you're getting hit with straights, you need to learn how to use that jab and then close the distance. Smother those straights. So I already talked about that, so moving on. The next one would be not having a good jab. I see a lot of other good fighters sometimes, and maybe they do have power in their hands or a good power punch. But it's just like Teddy says, if you don't have a very good jab, you're going to whiff a lot on your punches because opponents are going to see your punches coming so much easier whenever there's not a jab to, hide or confuse your opponent as to which punch is coming next. A lot of intermediate fighters forget their jab and then they just end up brawling, and that leads to a lot of whiffing, and then it leads to a lot of slop, and they make the fight a lot tougher than it has to be. Proper use of the jab makes every fight easier. Okay, so one major thing I see a lot of intermediate players do, and it's one of my biggest pet peeves, is I call them deterrent or keep away punches. That's whenever your opponent throws punches not to score clean or because they time them, but just to keep you away and hoping that you'll walk into the punches and they'll be able to score a little bit. And normally they throw punches that have automatic priority, like either straights or uppercuts. It makes it hard to come forward because as soon as you begin to get in range, they start to mash the same punch over and over again, and so it's hard to close distance. But I think any sort of strategy where the simplest way to beat it is for your opponent to do nothing is automatically a terrible strategy, because a lot of these boxers cause themselves to lose just by wasting too much stamina. You never want to be boxing like you're operating a fire extinguisher. You always want to pick and time your shots to make sure that they maximize the most possible damage opportunity as well as waste as little stamina as possible. So you want to keep down any sort of unnecessary movements. Which brings me to my last point. Don't waste movements. This kind of goes along earlier when I was talking about not windmilling in the earlier novice categories. A lot of people at intermediate like to sidestep and waste stamina, or throw keep-away punches and waste stamina. It's a shame because there's a lot of great fighters that have, amazing reflexes that can hit you so hard, and, they have all kinds of tools and techniques. But then they get overconfident and they start dashing around the ring with too many sidesteps, or they just waste a lot of energy with unnecessary head movement, or with, frivolous punching. And they lose to fighters that may not have, the same fancy counters or fancy bag work. I consider myself a person that uses very good fundamentals. I come across opponents all the time that I feel that they're way better at me at landing certain punches. Maybe they just have a lot more talent when it comes to, seeing things in slow motion and be able to hit those home run hits. Don't get me wrong, I'm pretty good too. But I'm able to beat a lot of these opponents simply because they waste stamina and they give me an easier fight as the fight goes on, because they don't know how to conserve their movements and not waste them on unnecessary, frivolous movements. So watch my video about stamina. I break down everything from head movement to sidestepping to power shots to clinching. It explains everything so you can see what you want to avoid and what you want to look for and encourage from your opponent. Oh yeah, and I guess one more thing, I forgot to include it earlier. So, most intermediate players are aware of their own stamina, but they're not aware of their opponent's stamina, meaning that whenever their opponent has low stamina, they don't rush in and capitalize and try to get inside like they should. Or maybe they think because their own stamina is not bottomed out that it's okay to sidestep or use a lot of head movement because your stamina never seems to be at zero, and they think that as long as they maintain their stamina at full that it never drains out. Well, that's not true. Even if your stamina is full and you repeatedly do a lot of sidestepping or windmilling, it'll start to burn that stamina just like a wick on a candle. So finally, let's go ahead and move on to the expert level. So I've already covered a lot of the expert skills. I would consider experts at this game probably 10% or less. I'm guessing probably closer to 3%. Now, there's nothing special or extra that they do. They just have all of the skills combined from the previous levels, and that they don't make any of the mistakes that the previous levels are notorious for committing. So let's go through the criteria of what makes an expert player. Number 1. First of all, they throw power shots, and the more the better. We talked about that earlier. Throwing power shots shows great confidence. Yes, they are easier to counter, but it also gets your opponents to open up and then allow themselves to be more open to counters as well. Not only should they be comfortable throwing power shots, but they should actually be able to go for a signature punch whenever they're down on the scorecards to go for a Hail Mary KO. We've all been in tough situations. It happened to Rocky Marciano, it happened to Joe Louis, it happened to Julio Cesar Chavez against, well, I forget the guy's name, but he knocked him out like in the last 2 seconds of the fight. It was very controversial. Anyways, that needs to be in your arsenal. You can't call yourself elite or at the expert level if you are losing the fight and then you have your back against the ropes just giving up. Again, little or no wasted stamina. Your stamina should be high at all times. Until you get to the 7th round, your stamina should still be around, I would say, 85% or above. Now, those last couple of rounds, you can do whatever you want with your stamina at that point. You can go for broke then, although I would try to maintain your stamina above 90% at all times. But you can't call or consider yourself elite if your stamina is consistently below 60% going into the 7th round. Next, to build up from the last level, now you want to be strong at all ranges. You need to be strong from the inside, from the outside, and then especially from the pocket. You need to be able to hurt people with big counters from the pocket. Now, at the lower levels, you're looking for situational counters or maybe an overall strategy or range that you're trying to implement. At the expert level, you're looking for whatever the opponent gives you. If the opponent is really bad at whiffing, you're not going to try to go toe-to-toe and give them the range where they might be able to connect. You're going to go ahead and keep them at the outside and use whatever the weaknesses of your opponent are to shape and dictate how you're going to fight. You're not going to be on complete autopilot, but you're going to have so many different situations and scenarios that you've planned for that it's just basically going to be a rehearsal of earlier training. No matter what your opponent does, because at this level, people can't surprise you anymore. Now here's a couple of mental tips real quick. A lot of opponents are going to try to get you to get emotional, that way you're not going to box as well. They figure that if they can make you mad or upset or frustrate you, that it's going to cause you to not play as well, and then they can capitalize. There's people whose whole career specializes in just in-party trash talk. I avoid all of that by muting in-game chat. And then the other thing that I do is that I skip the intros. The reason for this is I don't even want to see my opponent's record. I don't want to see that my opponent has a record of, 1,000 wins and only 10 losses, because that might psych me out. I might see that and think, oh, this opponent is really good, so I need to box a certain way. I need to be more careful. I can't use any of my normal moves. I need to be a lot more conservative. You don't want to think anything like that. No. You want to come in and you want to be yourself, and you want to see all the opportunities available. If you freeze yourself by thinking that your opponent is going to be, just some sort of cobra or master, you're going to psych yourself out, and you're not going to see all the openings that present themselves. I can't tell you how many people I've seen that had, just records that had my heart pounding as soon as I saw them, but then the guy went out there and sucked and didn't have any skills. And you never know when you're going to see, somebody like LX Sniper on a fake account. He could have, a terrible looking record, but then you're in for a fight. So there's no point in even looking at that. I skip all of that, and I'm ready to go as soon as the fight starts. But once the fight starts, I take my time and I'm not in a rush. I don't have anything to prove to anybody, so I don't feel like I have to punch first or move a certain way first, or even that I need to wait to counter. I just move around comfortably and do what I'm going to do, and it feels more natural as the fight goes on. Now, the last thing that I'll say is defense. You want to keep your opponent's percentage landed at 40% or less. The lower, the better. I know I said earlier that in order to be intermediate, you only had to have 3 of the skills that I talked about from earlier. Well, in order to be expert, I would say you need to have closer to 15 or 20. That includes all of the punches, but then all of the defense to those punches. And then all the awareness of what to do in each given scenario. So what to do if your opponent is windmilling, what to do if your opponent is sidestepping, what to do if your opponent is backing up, what to do if your opponent is coming forward. And you need to do all of this while holding your opponent to 40% or less punches landed. Even if you don't have a ton of skills like whiff punishing or cornering opponents, this is the first measurable metric that you can, try to pursue achieving. And then you can say you have at least one elite element to your game. So that's what I think makes an elite player. It's basically not making any mistakes. It's the ability to throw power shots. You're effective at all ranges. You're powerful moving forward, moving backwards, left hand, right hand, body, head. You're able to consistently preserve 80% or more stamina at the very, very end of the fight. You're able to make power punches 8% or more of your total punch output, and you're able to hold your opponent to 40% or less accuracy. So now you know. If you ever see somebody talking about how elite they are, but then you find out that they don't throw any power shots, or that they don't have very good defense, or that they're only good moving backwards but not coming forward, well, now you see that we all have these different criteria for what makes someone truly elite. Because the leaderboards and people's word of mouth aren't going to tell you the whole story. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully it either showed you certain things to work on, or made you appreciate just how many skills you actually have. I'm Bluntest Diagram on Xbox Live. This is my YouTube channel, Small Enhancements Gaming. Do me a favor and like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Bought the script, ain't prescribed, fuck the law, don't abide. National pills, crush, grind, scene, cuz ultra vibe.